Have you ever wondered what's left of you when the world goes quiet? When the calls stop, when the messages dry up, when no one's checking in, and there's no one to check in on? Is that emptiness? Or is it something else entirely? You see, we are creatures of companionship. From the moment we are born, we are taught that to be alone is to be incomplete, as though solitude were some dreadful condition, like poverty or sickness. But what if I told you that this is a kind of illusion? Not because friends are unworthy, not because love is unimportant, but because the frantic need for others, the desperation to be surrounded, liked, or understood, is often the very thing that separates us from our true selves. When you are alone, truly alone, there is no audience, no one to impress, no expectations to fulfill. You are no longer acting on a stage. You are simply being. And this, my dear listener, is where the real magic begins. You learn to hear the whisper of your own thoughts, the rhythm of your own breath. You begin to realize that much of what you called your personality was merely a response to others, a reflection of how you wish to be perceived. But in the absence of others, the mirror vanishes, and you discover the face behind it. Now, I am not advocating for a life of isolation, nor am I romanticizing loneliness. No, that would be a misunderstanding. I am speaking instead of solitude, the art of being with yourself, the joy of walking through a forest with no one to talk to and yet feeling no less connected, of sitting by the sea and knowing that you are enough, not because someone else said so, but because you felt it in your bones. You see, we often say, I need friends to be happy, as though happiness were something delivered by post, wrapped in conversation and tied with laughter. But isn't it curious, that the sages, the mystics, the great thinkers of old, they all withdrew at some point. Into deserts, into caves, into silence. Why? Because in silence, the ego cannot find food. In solitude, you stop trying to be someone and begin to feel what it is to be. Having no friends, then, is not a tragedy. It is an invitation to rediscover your own company, to question who you are when there is no one around to tell you, and perhaps, just perhaps, to fall in love with that person. And what happens when you no longer need anyone? When your sense of self is not dependent on their attention or approval? Well, now that is where things begin to shift. You see, when you no longer need anyone, you become dangerously free. Not dangerous in the sense of harm. No, not at all. But dangerous to illusions. Dangerous to the systems that rely on your insecurity. Dangerous to the voices, inside and out. That whisper, you must earn your worth. When you stand fully in your own presence, content in your aloneness, you cannot be manipulated by loneliness. You are no longer caught in the chase for validation, for applause, for someone to complete you, as though you were born a puzzle with a missing piece. But you weren't. You were born whole. Now, many will misunderstand this state. They will look at a solitary man or woman and say, how sad, they must be lonely. But loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of connection. And connection, paradoxically, begins not with others, but within. Think about it. You can be at a crowded party, surrounded by faces and voices, and feel like a ghost, unseen, untouched. And yet, in the stillness of your room, with nothing but your own heartbeat for company, you may feel an inexplicable peace. A union with the very fabric of existence. This is the great irony. The person who fears having no friends often does not truly know what friendship is. For friendship, when it is real, is not clinging. It is not dependency. It is not, I need you to keep my loneliness at bay. No, it is the meeting of two sovereign beings, each whole unto themselves, walking side by side, not leaning, but dancing. And so, those who embrace solitude are not antisocial. They are beyond the social. They have tasted a flavor of freedom that cannot be found in the crowd, because when you don't need friends, then, and only then, can you be a true friend. Not a beggar of time or attention, but a giver of presence. Not someone who enters a room looking to be filled, but someone who overflows. The power of having no friends is the power of not being afraid to lose anyone. It is the courage to face the silence and find, to your surprise, that it is not empty, that it is singing. And once you hear that song, that deep, resonant hum at the center of your being, everything else becomes a kind of music too. Even the absence, even the waiting, even the echoes of a world that once told you that solitude was a failure. But now you know better. Now you have tasted and the untamed joy of simply being, not being someone for someone else, but being as the mountain is, as the ocean is, as the moon hanging quietly in a dark sky. And here's the strange part. When you no longer seek, things begin to find you. When you are no longer striving to be liked, you become likable in a different way, not as a mask, but as a mirror. People are drawn to you not for what you offer them, but for the peace you emanate, the kind that says you are free too. You become like a still pond, not chasing ripples but reflecting whatever looks in. And in that stillness, the right people may come, not out of your hunger but out of your wholeness, not to save you but to walk with you for a while, two fires sharing warmth without needing to merge into one. Now that doesn't mean the path of solitude is always pleasant. No, not at first. The early stages of being alone can feel like withdrawal from an addiction, because in many ways it is. We are addicted to noise, addicted to validation, addicted to the reassurance that we exist because someone else confirms it. But take that away, and something deeper is revealed. Like the stars that appear only after the sun disappears. It is in those moments, when the phone doesn't ring, when the inbox is empty, when the invitations don't come, that you are given a great gift, the chance to become acquainted with yourself, stripped of performance. At first it may feel like nothing. You may say, "What's the point of this?" But sit with that discomfort. Let it burn a little. And then watch as slowly you begin to notice the subtle textures of your inner life, the thoughts that arise unprompted, the creativity that whispers when no one is watching, the instincts that speak in your own voice. And one day it dawns on you, like a sunrise you didn't realize you were waiting for. You are not lonely. You are vast. You are not lacking company. You are in company with all things. Birdsong, wind, breath, memory, dream, all of it converging in the space you thought was empty. But emptiness, you realize, is not the absence of life. It is the womb of it. And so the power of having no friends is the discovery that you were never truly alone, only unaccompanied, only temporarily distracted from your own soul. And what is found when you return is not just peace but presence, not just silence but song. You return not as a half, seeking a whole, but as a whole, smiling at the game of halves. You see, most of us spend our lives as merchants of connection, bartering pieces of ourselves in exchange for attention, affection, status. We dress it up as love, but often it is fear with a painted face, fear of being forgotten, fear of fading away in the eyes of the world, fear of irrelevance. But when you stand alone long enough, that fear begins to dissolve, not through resistance, but through recognition. You begin to realize you are the world, not separate from it, but a ripple of its infinite pattern. The wind that brushes your skin is not out there. It is you, meeting yourself in motion. So then, what use is friendship? Well, once you no longer need it, it becomes beautiful. No longer a necessity, but a gift. No longer a crutch, but a dance. You are no longer afraid to walk alone. And in that strength, you become the kind of person others feel safe walking beside, not to fill your void, but to share in your overflow. And that perhaps is the truest friendship of all. Not a contract, not a transaction, but a resonance. Yet still, many will ask, but what of love? What of connection? Are we not social beings? Yes, we are. But perhaps we've misunderstood what that means. Being social does not mean being surrounded. It does not mean constant chatter. It means being available to truth, whether it comes through another's eyes or through the sound of rain on your window. True connection is not bound by proximity. It is not limited by how many names you scroll through on your phone. No, it is something more ancient, more sacred. It is when two silences recognize each other. It is when solitude meets solitude and says, "Ah, there you are." You see, when you have befriended your own aloneness, you carry with you a kind of gravity, not the pull of desperation, but the quiet strength of a planet that no longer needs moons to orbit it, and then, strangely enough, people start to appear. Not because you chased them, but because your stillness echoed something they had forgotten in themselves. And so the paradox reveals itself. Only those who do not fear being alone are capable of true togetherness. Only those who need nothing are capable of giving everything. Only those who have embraced the power of having no friends are free to love without chains. Now when you no longer chase friendship, you begin to embody friendship itself. You become a resting place for the weary, not because you beckon them, not because you promise them something, but because your presence no longer demands anything at all. You don't speak to be heard. You speak because the silence invited it. You don't give to be liked. You give because there's nothing in you that lacks. And people notice this. Oh yes, they notice, though they may not know how to name it. They'll say you seem calm, or grounded, or different. But what they're really sensing is the absence of need. And in a world addicted to validation, someone who no longer craves it is both alien and magnetic. You see, most friendships, though well-meaning, are mirrors of mutual insecurity. I'll reflect the version of you that you need if you'll reflect mine. It's a bargain, it's survival, it's often unconscious, but it is not freedom. Freedom arrives when you're willing to look into a mirror and see no reflection at all, and still feel whole. Now you may ask, isn't that lonely? Isn't? And yes, sometimes it is. But loneliness is a teacher. And like all great teachers, it shows up when you're ready to graduate from distraction. It strips away what is false. It asks, can you sit with yourself, without scrolling, without texting, without reaching? And if you can, even for a moment, you will find that beneath the loneliness, there is a luminous quiet, a sacred stillness, and in that stillness there is room. Room for your thoughts to unfold without judgment, room for creativity to rise without interruption, room for the truth of who you are to speak, softly, finally, and be heard. Perhaps then, you begin to see friendship not as something to acquire, but as something to radiate. Not a noun, but a verb. Not a group, but a way of being. You walk through the world not hoping to belong, but knowing you do, by the very fact of your being. You no longer try to fit into the rhythm of others. You move to the rhythm within. And ironically, in doing, so you become more attuned to everyone else. Because when you're not trying to impress, you're finally able to listen. When you're not busy being somebody, you can finally see everybody. And that, my friend, is where the real magic begins. You stop mistaking connection for attachment. You stop confusing presence with possession. And suddenly, even fleeting encounters, a nod from a stranger, a shared laugh with a cashier, the silence between words in an old song, all feel full, complete. You are no longer starving. You are tasting. And here's the twist. When you have mastered the art of standing alone, you also become the one others lean on, not because you offer solutions, but because your very being says, I don't need anything from you. You are safe to be as you are. That is power. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demands applause, but the kind that moves like gravity, invisible, irresistible, calm. There is a certain authority that comes from knowing you are not for sale. Not your time, not your presence, not your peace. And this doesn't make you cold. No, quite the opposite. It makes you warm in a way that doesn't burn. You no longer need to grasp for connection like a drowning man gasping for air. You become the air, effortless, essential, everywhere. And yet you don't advertise it. You don't preach it. You simply live it. You walk differently. You speak with more pauses. You listen longer, because you're no longer waiting for your turn to be understood. You already understand yourself. And from this place, something remarkable begins to happen. You may have no friends in the conventional sense. No circles, no cliques, no Friday night plans, and yet feel more connected than you ever did when you were surrounded. Because you are in relationship with life itself, with the way shadows lengthen in the afternoon, with the strange beauty of a cracked sidewalk, with the memory of a conversation from years ago that still teaches you, with your breath, your body, your heartbeat, loyal companions all along. And from this intimacy with existence, every interaction becomes a meeting of worlds, not of needy fragments, but of sovereign beings. So perhaps we've had it backward all along. Perhaps friendship isn't something you get. Perhaps it's something you become. And once you do, you begin to notice that nothing is missing. The world does not feel far away anymore. It feels like it's meeting you everywhere you go. A breeze feels like a whisper meant just for you. A rustling tree becomes a conversation. Even pain, even longing, they show up not as punishments, but as visitors bearing messages. And you welcome them because you're no longer running. There is a strength in that, a sacred unbotheredness. You're no longer trying to make every moment meaningful. You begin to notice that every moment already is. And it's not because someone else is there to witness it with you. It's because you're there, fully present, alive. So then, what is the value of having no friends? It is the discovery that solitude is not a gap to be filled. It is a terrain to be explored. It is a home you build within yourself. Quiet, sacred, indestructible. And from that home, everything changes. You no longer fear endings, because you've met yourself beyond them. You no longer fear rejection, because you've already accepted who you are. You no longer seek permission to be, because being is your birthright, and it's from there, from that rooted stillness, that the deepest kinds of friendships may finally grow. Not out of dependence, not out of habit, but out of resonance. You meet others not as passengers, but as fellow travelers. Not to complete you, but to walk with you a while, each on their own path, each whole, each free. And still, this is not the end, because something more subtle begins to take shape. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It arrives like dawn, unnoticed at first until you look up and realize the whole sky has changed color. You begin to feel an intimacy with life itself, not with the people in it. Not with the roles or stories, but with life, raw and unfiltered. It greets you in the spaces in between, the silence between thoughts, the breath before speaking, the pause before sleep, and in those spaces, you sense something watching with you. Not a person, not a deity, but a presence. Maybe it's always been there. Maybe the reason we chase friendships, relationships, recognition, is because we've been trying to remember that presence. But it is not out there. It's not in a room full of people or a feed full of faces. It's here, in you, waiting patiently beneath the noise. And when you have no friends, and the world falls quiet enough, you finally hear it. It doesn't demand anything. It doesn't ask you to prove yourself. It simply is. And in its stillness it says, you were never alone. You just didn't know how to listen yet. So this path, this power of having no friends, it's not a curse. It's a calling. Rite of passage into a deeper way of being, because when you stop trying to be seen, you finally see. And when you stop asking to be loved, you begin to embody love, and that changes everything. You may still live a quiet life. You may still walk through days with no invitations, no messages, no hands to hold, but you will feel held by life, by this moment, by your own breath. And what more profound friendship could there be than the one you cultivate with the universe inside you? Still, the journey doesn't end here, because from that inner stillness, something begins to stir, not urgently, not with noise, but like the first ripple on a lake at dawn, gentle, inevitable, sacred. It is longing, yes, but not the kind that aches, not the desperate thirst for someone to fill you. No. This longing is different. It is a longing to share, not to complete, to give, not to grasp. When you've lived in the house of your own soul long enough, it becomes so full of insights, of stillness, of quiet joy, that it begins to overflow. And from that overflow comes invitation. You begin to smile more, not because someone's watching, but because it feels good to smile. You begin to speak with strangers, not to fill the silence, but because your silence is generous enough to include others. And slowly, the world opens. But notice, this isn't you seeking friends again out of emptiness. It is friendship arising from fullness. That's the difference. When you had no friends, you discovered who you are without mirrors. And now, as people begin to gather around your light, you no longer mistake their gaze for your reflection. You simply shine, and in that light others recognize something. Not something about you, but something about themselves that they had forgotten. And suddenly your solitude becomes a sanctuary. Others may not know what draws them to you. They may call it calm, or depth, or wisdom. But really, they are sensing the echo of something ancient and true, the self that no longer fears aloneness. You become a quiet reminder that a person who walks alone is not lost, but found. Still, this isn't a destination. You haven't figured it out. You haven't ascended or won. No, this is simply the next unfolding. And the beauty of it is that it keeps unfolding, moment by moment, breath by breath. Because from the center of solitude, a new question begins to emerge. Not one that demands an answer, but one that invites you to keep walking. So if you find yourself with no friends, no plans, no calls, no one to fill the silence, perhaps that's not the absence of life, but the doorway to something deeper, and in stepping through it, you may just discover that the friend you were searching for was quietly waiting within you all along.